Chapter 6 in the Rawls and Bean book deals with the increasing infiltration of Americans. They trickled in early in the late 1700s and early 1800s, which wasn't really elaborated on in Chapter 5, of course. But then in the late 1830s and 40s, they really started coming in. The first recorded anchorage of an American ship on the California coast was in 1796. It was a ship called the Otter, oddly enough. There was an awful lot of killing of otters for the fur trade, as you know. This ship was from Boston. The Otter left behind several convicts who escaped from the English penal colony in Australia. They were supposed to go somewhere else, but the commander of the Otter pulled a fast one on the officials at the time and left them on shore in California. In 1803, a ship called the Lila Bird landed in San Diego. This ship was also involved in the sea otter trade. The Spanish authorities threw these sailors in jail, but those sailors were rescued ultimately by their shipmates. Many, many other ships followed, and the chapter elaborates on some of those ships that landed in California. Many were American. The sea otter and the fur seal trade were big, and those animals were nearly exterminated because of that trade at this time along the California coast. Then in 1821, Spanish authorities opened up ports to foreign ships. This is right around the time that, of course, Spain was defeated by the Mexicans, and Mexico became independent. The British ship John Begg arrived in 1822, signed a three-year deal with the Spanish, paying $1 per hide. Remember that the hide and tallow industry was big, that the cattle would be killed for their hides, which then would be shipped elsewhere to be manufactured into finished goods. But then a few weeks later, after this three-year contract, this British ship signed with the Spanish for $1 a hide. A Boston ship arrived, the Ssci Ch, with William A. Gale on board, and he offered the Spanish $2 a hide, and so the Spanish are saying, yeah, so much for this British ship, we're not going to honor that contract. Gale became the agent in Monterey for the Boston trading firm of Bryant and Sturgis, which was a big trading firm in Boston. Hides were getting to the point where they essentially were the currency of the new California, and they were called California banknotes. Ships from the East Coast brought finished goods in exchange for those hides. This trade often brought those East Coast ships profits as high as 300%, even after duties were paid. It's very important to note a book that I hope sometime next year to have the time to read, because many people have said, Mr. Boyd, you got to read this book. Richard Henry Dana's book is called 2 Years Before the Mast. It gives a detailed account of early California and the hide and tallow trade, which was the main industry at the time. Richard Henry Dana was employed by Bryant and Sturgis in the hide trade, and Richard Henry Dana wrote about his 2-year journey up and down the California coast, involved in being on a ship in the hide trade. And one of the things attributed to Richard Henry Dana in his book, it was a quote, "In the hands of enterprising people, what a country this might be." It puzzled Dana that they would ship these hides all the way to Boston and get goods manufactured out of these raw materials when they didn't set up their own manufacturing. He even made a kind of a quip about how these people have so many grapes in California, yet they import terrible wine from Boston. So this is a benchmark book in early California. Also of note, the beaver trappers, notably beaver trapper Jedediah Smith, who is credited as having the first overland expedition to California in 1826. The governor at the time, the Mexican governor that I mentioned earlier, Echeandia, he was suspicious of Smith and ordered him to leave, and Smith defined California as the settlements along the coast, so he went over the Tehachapi's into the San Joaquin Valley where Echeandia wouldn't bother him. And he went as far north in the San Joaquin Valley and the southern Sacramento Valley to a point to what is known today as the American River near Sacramento. He returned to his base in Utah by July of that year, 1827, made a few more journeys before being killed in 1831. So there is Jedediah Smith. Other trappers followed, including James Ohio Patty, including Joseph Rutherford Walker, who the Walker River is named after in eastern California and in west central Nevada, over there in Mono County. Walker made the first recorded westward crossing through the center of the Sierra Nevada, coming down the Stanislaus River. Um, it has been written by historians that Walker was the first white man to see Yosemite Valley, but others say he actually saw Hetch Hetchy instead. There's an image of Walker from a website called thefurtrapper.com. Interesting website, I'm sure. Other early settlers included a fellow by the name of John Gilroy, who was a Scottish sailor on an English ship. He was left in Monterey during a time of illness. He ended up staying and marrying a daughter of the prominent Mexican family, the Ortegas, ended up settling in the area that now bears his name, the city of Gilroy, California, wouldn't you know, in southern Santa Clara County. Then there was William G. Dana, who was a relative of Richard Henry Dana. Alfred Robinson also. These two gentlemen settled in the Santa Barbara area. Abel Stearns, who settled in L.A. in 1829, became a big land owner. Maybe that's who Stearns Wharf is named after in Santa Barbara, not sure. Then there's a guy named Thomas Larkin, who settled in Monterey and in 1832 opened a general store there and was credited with developing what's called the Monterey style of architecture. Another prominent settler was a fellow by the name of John Marsh, also called Dr. John Marsh. He settled near Mount Diablo in 1837. It's time to talk about Johann August Sutter, aka John Sutter, from Switzerland. In 1834, he was in so much debt in Switzerland that he actually abandoned his family and made his way to America. Real upstanding fellow. Arrived in Monterey in 1839, and he had a crazy plan to colonize the Sacramento Valley up near Sacramento, where Sacramento is today. He received Mexican citizenship and received a land grant where Sacramento is today, and he built a fort. There is Sutter's Fort State Historic Park, which is at about 28th and L, I think, in downtown or midtown Sacramento. It's a park today that you can actually visit because it's been rebuilt and restored. This fort, Sutter's Fort, became a focal point for early American overland migration to California. Covered wagons, a lot of them started coming in the 1840s, and the first organized group to cross the Rockies for the purpose of settlement here was the Bidwell-Bartleson Party. They were from Missouri under the banner of the Western Immigration Society. They were attracted by a letter from the aforementioned John Marsh. They headed west in May of 1841 with what were called ridiculously inaccurate maps. They crossed the Sierra Nevada and made it into Marsh's ranch near Mount Diablo on November 4th, 1841. A perilous journey, and many of them died. In the fall of 1841, there were three men, Workman, Rowland, and Wilson. They traveled from Santa Fe to Los Angeles. In 1843, a rather arrogant fellow, as the book describes, Lansford Hastings, led a party from Oregon to California. More settlers were coming by 1845, especially because of glorified reports by Larkin, Marsh, and Fremont, and especially Hastings, who actually had some very misleading impressions of how marvelous the place was and lured people west. There was a party called the Stevens Townsend Murphy Party of 1844. They were also from Missouri. They were the first to succeed in getting wagons over the Sierra Nevada and the first to make use of what would later be the main route across the Sierra Nevada. That route was later named Donner Pass after the 1846 tragedy of that party's crossing. Early winter snows trapped the Donners from November 1846 to February 1847. The survivors were rescued by a party that came from Sutter's Fort in Sacramento. 47 of them managed to survive. There were 87 initially. The survivors, many of them survived by eating the flesh of the dead in order to survive. This is a picture of Donner Pass, an old U.S. Highway 40, which is south of today's Interstate 80 by about a half a mile or so, and there's Donner Lake in the background. At this point, it was still a lot more attractive, though, for American settlers to move to Oregon or Texas in terms of going west. California, even though there were some glorified accounts of how wonderful it was, really didn't have the allure at this point that other places did. Vallejo, who was the military controller of all of California under Mexico's flag, was very concerned about the European Americans invading and asserted that if this continued, Mexican citizens of California would, quote, be replaced or dominated by another race. Vallejo said proud Californios would fight to their last drop of blood to, quote, preserve their noble attitude of free men. The trickle of westward moving people, though, was about to become a flood, as you'll see, for a big reason, which you probably already know about, which will be elaborated about in Chapter 7. This ends the Chapter 6 narrated PowerPoint.